The path to completing a game is never linear. It isn't a case of do or don't. Akin to this game you're about to see, a completionist is a game detective. You methodically work your way through a winding, maze-like structure of multiple witness-like game designs, flaws, and characters to get towards an end point. You don't know if this endpoint is going to be good or bad, if it's difficult or easy, if it's worth it or not, if it will make you or break you. In this case, you will meet varied characters, a gritty, lifelike world with raw emotional themes such as assault, hate, racism, political theories. I'll look into psychology, I'll fall in love, I'll get my heart broken, and I'll solve the case. I'm going to be extremely vague about the story on this one because regardless of the outcome, I believe this is a game you should play yourself. My playthrough will not be the same as yours. Every story ends slightly differently, but more importantly, every character is as unique as you are watching this video. So, join me in solving the case of Disco Elysium, and along the way, finding out if completing this game will make me or break me. The road to completing a game is never the same. Some games have roads littered with signs and obvious directions on how to reach that end goal, while some, the games are so obscure, long and daunting that the road to completion is barely travelled. Signs may be rusted or never even built to begin with. That's how I feel towards starting Disco Elysium. The game has always interested me as I love classic CRPGs such as Baldur's Gate. However, Disco Elysium is its own beast, and I learned quickly it's not like a CRPG at all. In fact, it has no combat and really no gameplay to speak of other than talking to people. I checked the trophies and it features many which were quite frankly beyond me. Virtually every trophy featured a term that without having played the game gives you no context on what needs to be done to reach the end of the road. So I check a trophy guide to see what needs to be done, and it was not much better. A few guides do exist, all of which are slightly different and some wrong. So I decide that this Make Me or Break Me is not just a documentation on completion, but a documentation on discovering how to complete Disco Elysium. It seems that whilst a tough game, it's also arduously long, featuring multiple playthroughs, something which I nearly always loathe, including a playthrough on hardcore, which I will get to. This results in a game twice to 3 times longer than any I've yet done on this channel. So surely if any game so far will break me, this would be the one. Maybe because I'm a sadist, and I mean I have to do it anyway, I figured I would just go straight into hardcore mode and optimize the XP I earn, because when you're in hardcore, everything is tougher, you require higher skills to meet skill checks, but you get more XP in return, so it's harder at the start, easier near the end of the game. One thing I do want to note is that there was a guide that told me that you can only start hardcore once you've finished the game. This is not true. For some reason, they've just hidden the hardcore mode in the options of the game. So you have to go into the options, manually enable hardcore, then start a new game. The starting skill point selection is a tough one. There is clearly a lot of option here, and I mean it overwhelmed me. But without context of the game, it's really difficult to know what you're taking. I feel it's good when games do the personality quizzes, as it helps a newer player who doesn't understand skill interactions or how a character will act with them. You know, are there consequences to low skills that impact me throughout the entire game? Are some stats just plain worse than others? It's a lot of choice with no support for the player. Nonetheless, I ended up choosing what I felt good about personally, which was Psych at 5, followed by Motorics at 4, Physique at 2 and Intellect at 1. Essentially, my character is a puny idiot, but he is very good with his mouth and his hands. Thankfully, the game starts me off with a great feeling. My wonderful limbic system, which for those of you who don't know is in charge of survival, reproduction and all of that goodness, throws me a nice compliment about something that is linked to that reproduction thing that I just mentioned.
You can't even make out it's a ball when you're joking it out. It's that large.
It's pretty clear that you're a drunk man, and clearer sooner that you remember nothing in this game. I seem, look and display all the signs of a Charlie Sheen. Forget 2.5 men, soon it's going to be 1.5 detectives. Here I get the option to flirt, and even though I have a higher chance of failing than succeeding, I find it very difficult to say no. Not even because I want to flirt, but because the temptation of a risky choice is just too much for me. I play D&D and I am that guy that tries that one crazy play that has 1% chance of success and everyone's screaming no. I'm also that guy that needs to make sure he never gambles. Also, stay tuned and do not forget this situation because the game wants you to be punished for doing what I just did. They want you to think like this drunk idiot that life is all easy and fun and haha, flirt with lady. No, that ain't real life. Real life punishes you just for looking at somebody the wrong way. On the subject of emotion, the game doesn't hesitate to teach me that there is a strong, raw emotional presence. Generally in games you have options when talking and acting ranging from good to neutral and then evil. Usually the evil option is killing. Whilst playing Disco Elysium, you have a short exchange with a woman whom I had a small flirtatious comment towards, of which nothing came from. She leaves to her room. I wanted to knock and see if I could talk again, to which the game lets me know she's showering. Then, the game handles the situation by throwing at the player the kind of raw, untapped, animalistic thoughts that people have, the ones that happen in the mind for but a slip of a moment, a fraction of a second that gets lost to time, swallowed and forgotten. Like when you walk by a cliff and you think, what if I jumped? You never remember this, you don't dwell on it or even properly think about it, but there's that moment, that animalistic impulse. Disco Elysium assaults the player with this and provides them a conscious choice of unconscious thought. The animalistic desire to be afraid of loneliness, it's raw, unbridled and powerful. Carrying on from that display of raw emotion, the game also does not hold back with language used. As with a scale of morality, with right and wrong, good and evil, the game takes this into the dialogue. In this hilarious radio call, I let my precinct know that I lost my badge, and after a huge fuss with that, I also then admit I lost my gun. Then this happens.
Oh, I can't. Fuck.
I'm not going to.
Ask him.
Sergeant Orson here is wondering if you are still in possession of your genitalia. Over.
And here are my options in dialogue for that. Now, I would not say the second. For me, whilst funny in its own way, is a little bit crude and vulgar, and I definitely didn't select this in any of the playthroughs whatsoever, and I would never.
That's a negative. Not going to say that.
What's he saying?
He said he sodomized your mother.
The prick ate Mama's vanilla waffles at the captain's birthday party.
Sure, vanilla.
Shut up, Chester. This isn't funny. Tell him to apologize.
Whoops, I pressed the wrong one. During this same call, we hear a conversation we are not present for. During this conversation, one officer says that our character wanted to get worse. He didn't want to improve or become better, but to sink. It's an interesting concept because whilst learning about this mysterious game world, we also get to learn about ourselves, whilst forming ourselves. Do we find out who we are and align with that? Do we go with the flow of the character around us? Or do we stoop to their level? Or do we just become better? In the truest sense, the game provides the player a blank slate to move forwards in terms of character growth, general story, and skill progression. Though even now, after being done with the game, I still don't know why I was able to hear a conversation I wasn't present for. They never really explain that I'm aware of. Then, as is customary with this game, my sanity withdraws to the back of my mind as I have an internal monologue and physical contact with a mailbox.
The box seems...
Here you meet probably one of the best characters in the game. His name is Kuno. He is a disgusting, vulgar rat of a person, and he wears his very obvious, degenerate upbringing on his sleeve. But you don't hate him for what he is. Maybe you pity him, or you feel bad, but you accept that the world has made him, well, this.
Love it in the dick.
Fuck that! Pino, yeah, right!
They pay you no heed or pretend.
Shits himself?
Does Kuno know what a rake is? Kuno's not a gardener.
But this here is demonstration of how well designed characters and dialogue is. I mean, in but a moment of meeting this character, you get a feel for him, his inner feelings, why he acts and for whom he acts, why he targets you and plays with you as a player, why he's screaming absurdities and unnerving you as if he has control. For those of you in the UK, you probably meet a kid like this daily, and it triggers your PTSD of what is known as the common chav. I do want to make it clear though that this isn't about haha look at the poor person, because that's elitism. That's not what this is about. It could be that that's how you portray it in this game, but what the developers are trying to show here is that the world makes people who they are, and he is a product of the world, and you don't hate him for that. He is who he is, and Kuno says this best himself when he says this.
Kuno's Kuno, pig? The fuck are you calling a third person? Kuno's the...
He looks slightly confused, but proud he came up with that retort. Proud he came up with that retort.
Now that you've seen the graphics and you've had a chance to look at them and let them sink in, let's discuss them. The art style, I think, is beautiful. This is evident and I believe undoubtable. It oozes charm and adds a distinct immersive tone to the game. The gritty, surrealistic art style sucks you into the experience and enhances the surrealism of the writing. The game also shows no fear about using colour amongst the greys and generally drab tones of the world. This very gothic, Victorian, industrial city is enhanced by vibrancy. There's a theme of drugs in the game, and they do a really good job of mixing that psychedelic vibe with a very industrial, depressing city. I also bring up the art style though because there is one small issue, and it's this. Here, I can't work out how to get to the roof. The exact angle you must move forwards is tough to work out, and I figure at this point it's impossible. That is until I just use the auto walk feature on a nearby item to get up there. Unclear pathing and what's accessible is a slight issue with the art style. At this point I was hoping it's a one-time thing, it sadly is not. Later on in the game it gets really frustrating trying to move around, and you'll see an area such as this where you think you can get across, but you can't. It isn't that bad of a thing on paper, but with how much walking is in the game and how much backtracking, it gets very grating very quickly, and also causes an issue where you can't fully trust the game. Like, you can't trust that the game will let you walk from point A to point B, or that thing is traversable. Otherwise though, this is one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen, like a painting that has come to life. Here, I wanted to test how the skill system worked, as I see a police jacket hanging from a railing. It's probably mine, or my past drunk selves. Anyway, with a high enough skill, I could jump and grab it. Mine is not high enough at only 17%. I try anyway, and the repercussion for failure is health damage, of which I only have 2 points of health. So skill checks are a serious decision. They are not just to be taken lightly or winged, which has also been shown through social repercussions. As characters have personality and you're in a foreign world, their world, there is a social risk. You want to impress people, to break their view of you being useless, and so you want to look good and do good. Or at least that's the way I played it. Meaning the game manages to provide mechanical difficulty to failure, but also make you think and feel through social consequences, which is no easy feat in a video game. Very minor spoilers here. You're a detective, right? I mean, that's obvious, and as part of a detective there is a case of investigating bodies, and I mention here that there is a dead body, so I count that as a spoiler, though really I think everyone should have guessed that. Now, pretty much the first thing that you're suggested to do by your forced partner in this game, which is Kim Kitsuragi, he's awesome, but he's forced on you. He immediately, very strongly suggests that you remove the body from its position. For me, this was a massive wall because my character wasn't physically competent whatsoever, and the body apparently lets off this putrid smell. And in this moment I wanted to test the game again. Now, I knew I was drunk, or maybe just in a hangover. It's part of the story, it's pretty obvious at the start, it's not really spoilers, and vomiting can often help with being drunk. So I just let it all out. I let my character try and do the body and I let him vomit. And the game teaches me The items can provide boosts and second chances to otherwise locked out skill checks. In this case, after failing, I later get ammonia to help with the hangover and allow me to stomach the corpse. I grab the salts and I head back to the corpse, where I still unfortunately cannot succeed. It's impossible for me. My physique is just too low and I have a 3% chance of success no matter what I do for pretty much the entire game. So I just move on, I forget about the corpse. It is unfortunate as skill inhibits your ability to do something you want to do, but the side effect of that is game choice. Even the smallest ones really matter. And when you start this game and you pick your character, you can't invest all of your points into all skills. There will always be a weak point of your character where your story will differ from another character's story, and that is essential for an RPG. The perfect example of this is later on, where the cafeteria manager, which is just a glorified bartender who hates being called a bartender, tells me that I owe him money. So, I sneak away using my Motorix, wanting to test the game again. I return to him, to which he converses that I tried to sneak off, and I am still able to somewhat get out of the situation with another skill, but this demonstrates that choices do matter. There is cause and effect, and unlike other games, it's not so simple or ever so massive. Choices are not ending affecting consequences, or do they like me? They are always multifaceted, complicated choices that lead to vastly different social outcomes affecting characters' opinions, items obtained, understanding of the world, and more. Essentially, the choices in this game are much more than any other, yet the choices are often inconsequential. Despite this, because they affect the perception of your character, of which is a blank slate, you're trying to fill that in yourself. It bothers you as the player. You want to be viewed in X way, and you scratch towards that objective. Yet, if you fail a skill check, your slate gets filled in differently than you want it. The risks to failing choices, massive or meaningless, is much like real life. It's an identity in personality formulation. Essentially, choices in games are usually yes or no. You ask a question, you get an answer. In Disco Elysium, it's like every single thing you say could be like a moment where you go to flirt with a girl, and it just falls flat. All it takes is one poor comment and that bridge is burned. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience. I then meet the biggest liar in the world, who says this:
You're a handsome man, officer, with your mustache and your chiseled jaw and that silly dimple on your chin.
After I just discovered I look like this.
Behold, you have no idea who this thing is, do you? It appears you're also dead. There's clearly rigor mortis on your face. Oh wait, is that an expression? Are you trying to make an expression with that face? Why? Please stop. It's horrible. You're scaring yourself. You can't, can you? It's like it's not even voluntary anymore. You have worn that grin into your face. What does it even mean? What is the emotion you're trying to convey? Please promise yourself you are not going to try it on any of the ladies.
Here's an example of morality being a completely obscure, non-existent mechanic, yet impacting me more so than any games that have explicit morality mechanics. This old lady is suggestible to giving me money, and she offers me a pin. Sadly, I cannot refuse it, and I feel that this does not meet my personality, in which I'm trying to construct for myself, and so I feel guilty. I feel bad. This is not me. This is not who I am. And so I just reload. There is plenty of research into this phenomenon through Dungeons & Dragons, and I'll include a good one in the description. Essentially, a good role-playing game, in this case D&D, is a playground for people to test, promote and reinforce social beliefs and moral thought. In fact, it was found more consistently that people used it as a way to secure personality and moral thought, because unlike real life, it's a safer space to act as you truly want to act. That isn't to say in real life you can't, but there are tangible, real-world repercussions, jobs, friends, family. If your lover says that they love X politician, it isn't a good idea to go on a 10-minute rant about their capitalist ideals and how they're draining the lifeblood of a country. In D&D, or a good role-playing game like Disco Elysium, you can. Now, Disco employs some serious repercussions on social choices, so it mimics some of the social pressure of real life, unlike D&D. Regardless, this is a perfect example of how the game is designed for players to test, promote and secure their personality, morals and social abilities in a very realistic setting. This is even more so when considering people that are at risk or even in a bad place in life. For instance, my childhood wasn't great, and when I escaped that at around 18, I spent many years intentionally and unintentionally trying to improve myself, to educate and strengthen the morality section of my brain, the frontal lobe. Now, if myself or someone else in a bad way of life wanted to try this without games, then they may just simply be screwed. For instance, a child being abused by his parents, like that Kuno. In a school of bullies, he has no way to test morality formulation. What, is he going to plead that the person punching him in the face stops because it's not right? Though with games, ding ding ding, he can. The aforementioned study on D&D confirmed this too, as vulnerable adults found role-playing games particularly effective for support. That may have been a lot to take in, but put simply, Dungeons & Dragons is the pinnacle of role-playing design and offers the highest level of personal freedom, which allows players to practice and promote their personality and moral beliefs. Disco Elysium is the closest a game that I have ever played has gotten to this without being as limitless as Dungeons & Dragons itself. It's very impressive, and by playing this game, you too will get to test your personality, your social beliefs and your morality, either growing and learning more about yourself or cementing them.
A satisfying slash sounds across the paper. You're done, it seems to say. You're a swashbuckler with that pen, Harry, and it feels good. Feels like completion.
Did the game just call me Harry? Did it just spoil me? Something I shouldn't know yet? Is my own mind messing with me? I later find out it did not, and it did indeed spoil me. So please guys, get this game cancelled. We don't like spoilers. Here I unlock thoughts for the character, essentially a system that allows me to conceptualize ways of being for the character, almost like his personality. Currently there's these options which either penalize or buff me. I sure wish this is how it worked in real life, because I have constant thoughts and all I get from them is the realization that life is hard and forgot to take the bins out. Another success of the game is that it does not insult or pander to the player in any way whatsoever. So when performing dialogue challenges, it isn't as simple as just hitting the right choice. For instance, here I managed to get through to the young boy, Kuno, and talk to him privately. You would think that it's all done, skill check passed, but no. To continue, you have to appease Kuno by selecting the correct dialogue choices. The empathy skill check assists you by directing you in the right place, but there's still challenge for the player here. This is more so when factoring that no character in the game is bland or one-dimensional, and the dialogue is often complex, featuring unknown language, and at times it's very abstract. At this point in my gaming sesh, I had to go do real life stuff. You know how it is, can't be playing games all day. But I just couldn't get my mind off the game. Every moment where I wasn't thinking, my mind would drift towards the game. What I would investigate next. Questions about why my character hated being a cop, what's down the road, lore about the world, and just many more consuming thoughts. It's rare for a game to capture me in such a way, and it's rare to be so excited about next being able to play a game. Not to fight, not to adventure, not to level up, not the exciting, thrilling gameplay, but to just talk to people and explore a single small city. The game is filled with so many characters with personality, so much player input to create a character and affect narrative, so much freedom to explore and manipulate the world with multifaceted objectives and areas that the desire to discover is engrossing. I come back the next day excited to play, and you'd think that it would be a lot to come back to, but the game handily stores pertinent information, challenges, skill checks and clues in the journal. It's a good immersive way to get a refresh on forgotten clues, as a real detective would also write everything down. Here's a perfect example of good player choice. The empathy skill shows me how my character choices may affect characters. It doesn't say that anything is wrong, just that you may make a character cry, which, if you picked empathy, is something you may not want to do for your personality construction. This is powerful because it is more like real life. Normally in a game it would tell you, do it and she cries, or don't do it and she doesn't cry, but it's not quite as simple as that, and it doesn't affect things as dramatically as it would in other games. It's just like real life. You would think about saying something and you would think, well, if I say that they may cry, do I want to do that or do I not? I also unlock a statistics page for my journal, which is an incredibly helpful tool in mopping up some trophies. Though it's worth mentioning, I want this playthrough to be as serious as possible. I don't want to be metagaming. I want to RP a character as I want him, and I generally want to play the game as naturally as possible. However, in the future I can use this page to see which conversation topics need to be done and specifically target them. The clerk in the store called Freet, I think it's Freet or Frit, I don't know,
Welcome to Frit.
demonstrates the great writing because characters have little quirks in the way they talk that are both real, at least for me living in the UK, but also affect the dialogue. It's rare that a game factors in small colloquialisms and unique word choices into the writing, but this is what a detective would have to do. Untangle the confused language of various people speaking distinct languages with distinct languages used in a very global world. Eventually, I find my ledger in the trash. Wonder how it got there. Investigating it, I find out information on a love letter I received which causes me to black out. And I thought at the time, restart the game. It's an intentionally confusing moment which really adds impact to the dialogue system in the game because, again, the effects are much worse than just a list of options without consequence. In this case, I went digging so much, ignoring the game's behests to stop that I was actually penalised through fear of losing time and progress. The game taught me that the chosen option is dangerous, and this was done purely through a text-based system. This is something games with actual combat mechanics and death struggle with. Now this brings up time. The game loosely tracks time from the moment you wake up to the moment you sleep. Certain things can progress time, such as what just happened, but generally it feels slow-paced just as much as a general day would. Time can affect characters throughout the map. It can affect things you're able to do, such as sneaking into an area, and probably most importantly, you're able to ditch Kim and pretend to go to your room to sleep at around 10 and do things by yourself. The obvious idea of this time mechanic is that there's only so much you can do in a certain day before you have to sleep. So the idea there is that there's a pressure. But as you'll find out, the reality isn't quite that, and it becomes evident that the developers actually designed this time mechanic for a different reason, but we will get to that. The movement, especially when using auto walk to target objects, is sometimes painful. I mean, watch this scene just trying to walk to the roof. It's jagged, it's awkward, and it stutters. If you do it manually, you can struggle to walk where you actually want to walk as the map pushes you back. And then if you do it automatically, you're like a snail that's taken ket, which I assume they just move as slowly, but they just wiggle a bit more. I love the irony of this section where you question a child on specific topics as being good for books, and this child mirrors society's views by iterating things such as,
It happens, but usually the guy gets rich in the process, or should actually be rich himself, but those are unhappy books for most of the pages. These are not very common. You can't have a choice between bad and bad. Nobody wants to read a story like, well, maybe then it's fine. Maybe if the lady then decides not to pick either, because she doesn't need a bad man. Yes, that would be interesting.
You also go into a deep discovery of this child's life and a relationship with her parents, showing the mother how she is treating her child as badly as she was treated herself, using her as a tool and holding her to standards far above what she should. Punishing her daughter for the difficulty life has thrown at her, you address and reprimand the mother, changing the relationship completely and critiquing her parenting. Or you just ignore it all because it bears nothing on the story whatsoever that I ever noticed. But I strongly recommend, as a middle-aged drug-using drunkard, telling this capable businesswoman how to run her business and look after the child, because you get a sweet fedora from the kid. Why the kid has a fedora, I don't know. Clearly the dad must fund this business endeavour. Now, you may wonder, man, this is so much content, so much dialogue, so much exploration that has happened already. They really made sure to pack content into this small area. Well, this small area is just what I'd been exploring so far, and I quickly find out there is a much larger city to explore. There's winding paths and alleyways, different directions, and all sorts of skill checks I have no hope at succeeding on. The game does a really good job of expanding and unravelling as you go through it. That is until I find the door to hell and Kim gets possessed. Headphone warning here, guys.
There must be another way into the building.
Talking to this high-profile businesswoman, I came to a skill check that's a 72% chance of success. Now, this is something we all knew would eventually happen. I fail, and I fail later in the game as well on 92% to 99%, and just like this skill check, it is a red check, which means I do not get a second chance, and now I must either lose this forever, or if you're lucky there may be an object that's needed to proceed. It is somewhat annoying failing something that high, but that is a simple part of the game. You do have the option to save scum for situations like this, which I genuinely did not want to do on this playthrough. The game does get around and do well with its white checks, which mean that you get more chances at checks with skill increases and relevant items obtained. This check, sadly, was not one of those. Here, my rhetoric speaks to me about a growing urge to follow communism. This is how the game offers one of two important character directions. The first, a little backstory, of which I chose Sorry Cop, which I like to think of as a self-critical and, in my opinion, important to self-actualization in whatever capacity we humans can achieve that. Generally, this first section is just purely cosmetic, social things. I think there's Sorry Cop, Hobo Cop, just little quirky things. You can choose to pursue them or ignore them, or just pick the fort and never develop that. Doesn't matter. And then, the most important choice in the entire game that nobody tells you about when you play this game, that no guide tells you about, that isn't put out anywhere on the internet or in the game. And that is political belief. Now, if you pursue a political belief, as it's suggested here, even if you're just interested, and in some cases, even if you say maybe later, if you do that, you are locked out of all quest lines for all other political beliefs, even if you take the fort. This creates massive issues for me later on that ripple out my entire playthrough and completely screw up everything. And because of that, an entire extra playthrough was added onto my playtime. So please, if you play this, pick a political fort at the very start of the game out of the options, either through the trophy list or just find a list somewhere, and only pick that. All of the rest, you must completely ignore them. On the plus side, this does explain why all of the old racists never change their ways, because they literally can't. They're not allowed. Can't teach an old dog new political beliefs. Money. Money is an interesting concept in games. You will play, let's say, Elder Scrolls Oblivion. You'll perform a quest for a peasant and get often an item or even a sum of money. Then you may do that same quest for a rich noble and get the same possible reward. No difference. However, these rewards are not even relevant to the class or the quest giver. In real life, if you assisted a lower class working man who works stacking shelves in Tesco, he's not going to give you a Samsung 4K TV or $5 million. No. However, if you assisted a rich woman with locating her dead spouse, maybe then those rewards are a little bit more realistic. Well, Disco Elysium reflects this scarily well. I spent the entire game scrounging for money, and I mean like 1% of what I needed to pay off my past self's grievances. I begged people, I collected litter, I did everything I could just for a little bit of money. Then, upon talking to this rich businesswoman and passing a very simple skill check, she just gives me the full 100 I needed. Easy. scarily easy. But this is the way it is. The average person, this money matters a week's rent. To her, it's just change. Maybe for those of you with a sugar mama, this isn't a revelation, but it is for me. I've never had one. I'm looking, if anyone's watching this, if anyone, just put comment, just type in the comments, I'm a sugar mama, and I'll hit you up. Every time I level up, I take a crack at getting that jacket back. And despite failing, the fact that I can try is all that matters to circumnavigate a need for save scumming and how bad those red checks are that I mentioned earlier. It's cleverly designed and promotes attempting, where in other games with skill checks, options get locked out forever, which completely dissuades attempting. And it's only just at this point that I realise you can equip tools into your hands and use them. I don't think the game ever explicitly says this is how you do it. I just thought they were automatically used, as is normal, but no, you have to manually put them into your hands. The tools do have different functions. You need to use a crowbar to open locked containers. A flashlight can help with darkness, though there's only one instance where that's usable. And it's also annoying, it adds lag to the game when there's all these lighting effects going on. And further, even though at the bottom of the screen, I think at the bottom right, it has L3 and R3 for the tools, they don't actually do anything. I thought you'd be able to click the flashlight on and off, but you can't, it just seems to do nothing. Either way, it's a cool touch, if a little underwhelming. I think because it doesn't actually add anything, they probably should have just had them work automatically. The scope of the game increases massively as you progress, not just in terms of size, as I said with exploring the city, but with cultures, topical lore, political difficulties, and more. The game slowly unravels the world to you through chosen character conversations. If you talk to a racist man, it reveals the issues of racism within the world, which leads you to a man who suffers from said racism. And you can explore this sociological diversion, or instead you simply head to an area locked behind a skill check, such as getting the police jacket, which was simple by the way. I just had to take off my shoes and trousers. It really does help you move when they can just sway in the breeze like that. Anyway, I then unlocked the entire harbour section of the map. Now at this point, I played for another entire 2 to 3 hours and I had to stop. You'd think now, after maybe 5 hours total, that I'd be running out of clues, loose ends, possible avenues, but no, the plot has developed with more loose ends that feel clearer. I have a more distinct understanding of the world, yet a vast amount more questions. There's countless NPCs still to be spoken to, and with night approaching, I know I must soon sleep and pay rent for the next day. But I also discovered a time limit to the game, so all this possibility, the overwhelming plethora of people, places and failures to fix are multiplied by that fear of the looming time limit. Though as I said previously, that time limit is not what you think it is almost the complete opposite, as you will soon discover. One amazing way that the game builds upon lore is using the magazines and books that are in the game. There are loads, and I didn't read all of them in the game, you have to buy them, so it's not feasible to get every single one. The first one I read though is this one called
Kunst und Kultur.
Say that again?
Kunst und Kultur.
Could you say that again, but just like a little bit less aggressive?
Kunst und Kultur.
Okay, cool. The game tackles social issues in far more depth and complexity than any game I've ever seen. Let's use Elder Scrolls Skyrim as an example, mostly because everyone's played it. There's probably, better examples, but, everyone knows Skyrim. Witcher would be another really good example of racial diversity and oppression. Anyway, in Skyrim, the Nords believe themselves superior and so make the life of elves and others more miserable. This works because it's their land and they have the power. In other words, systematic racism. However, Disco Elysium shows this in a new light. What if the race outside the system believes themselves superior? In this case, with this character, he believes his race is superior, and the game tackles how he suckles on the teat of capitalism of those who are inferior to him despite his racial superiority. Is an entire world more complex and interesting than your average game, and a large part of the fun is learning and understanding these characters' views, and then potentially breaking them down when possible. Having finished my first day of the investigation with an overwhelming world of information to take in, Kim wants to talk on the balcony, a debrief. This is where the game provides a sorely needed moment of reflection on what's happened throughout the day, the highlights and failures. This is all done through Kim, and as it's his reflection, you also get his views on both you, your successes, and your relationship with him. Without this, the game may feel messy, but between this genius moment of reflection with a growing partner, the journal collecting tasks and skill checks, the game impressively manages to provide structure to the information that's thrown at the player. The chaos is organised and compiled for the player to access. The world is still a chaotic mess, but at least we can handle it with some semblance of control. The game very obviously hints, which really is not usual for this game, that the cause of Harry's state is his wife leaving him. X and his wife are thrown around a lot. But when the game is so vague, does it really just let you know this? Is he really an amazing detective turned suicidal due to his wife leaving? Or maybe the wife is a divergence, or it implies something else? Now, I won't spoil, but based on the ending that I got, it pretty much is what the game throws at you thinking it is. It is just an ex-girlfriend that crushed him. In a way, it's a nice moment of tangible believability and realism in this character's struggle. This is something that anyone could go through. The strongest man could be broken. But at the same time, it's also pretty boring. Then again, that was based on my ending of the game. I should mention as well, at this point, the game starts ramping up progressively the amount that it gives you options to turn to drugs and alcohol, to allow the addiction and need to continue. Your brain screams at you for more, which makes perfect sense, demanding it to become your true self. You can do this, or you can ignore it, though I'm not sure why you would do one or the other, or if it's just flavour. My confusion gets cleared up by the end of the game though, where I realise how important such a minor thing like this is. At the time, it seemed inconsequential to take some drugs or not take drugs. It seemed to mean very little, but actually it's a very major decision that alters one of the endings. That's right, multiple endings, but you'll see about that later. Here we meet the Hardy Boys. That's right, this is a direct sequel to the hit Hulu show that you've never heard of, Hardy Boys.
We're gonna move to
Revachol.
What? We need to get out of the city.
Revachol.
Everybody's a criminal?
Revachol.
The situations and conversations you have are a strange mix of extremely complex political views on an ever-changing, unfair and brutal world, and hilarious moments of strange characters or the common man simply not wanting to share their sandwich. Sometimes to break up the very heavy sociological debates on how the world should be run, you just need an old Frenchman to tell you to shove it.
When the dissidents come to our country, he hides. But try to get a bite of his dear sandwich and he gets claws? You're a special kind of vermin, Gaston.
I want to take this moment of conversation between these 7 union members to address the voice acting. The union men are this game's corporate working class man being used by the higher ups to do all the work with the least pay. Anyway, this conversation demonstrates how diverse and extremely high quality the voice acting is. Each NPC has a completely unique voice of actors I don't believe I've ever heard. They use cultural accents in the game, and when the game feeds you racism and stereotypes, it has you as an outsider naturally questioning whether these stereotypes apply or not. Further, the artwork is superb at reflecting their voices. Character tones and poses demonstrate a full picture of the characters. Mr. Digbick Titus here looks exactly how you would picture someone like. Yet, not always in a stereotypical way, but sometimes it is. It all feels very natural and real though, which is very impressive for an indie studio I'd never heard of until this game. I mean, again, I'm going to use Elder Scrolls Skyrim as an example here. Yeah, Skyrim. It's a AAA game by a highly established studio, but the voice acting in comparison is embarrassing. Very few voice actors with very stereotypical and generalised Nordic accents, then a handful of other voice actors for other races. Yet this game, every NPC features a unique voice with a unique cultural accent and then an even more unique regional or national dialect on top of that. The game exhumes more attention to detail and quality than any I've ever seen, and with a good few of these voice actors, They deserve an award. Here, just listen to some of the variations in this one single encounter of the game.
It's all about clean.
And here we go.
I know. Fatty walked on all fours. He's so.
Despite everything, the little man is...
Go your mom, Dennis.
That's more like it, boys. You heard him.
In every conversation this game throws at you, something is done to connect it to the larger game world or cause a reaction in the player. This can vary from forcing you to picking a political standpoint, to pushing you to developing a personality, to teaching you about the larger world, or, in this case with this young woman, teaching you that making a joking, flirtatious comment from your perspective is a disastrous mistake to others. Remember the joke I made at the start with the young woman, the little flirtatious comment? Well, you are told she went through one of the more horrific forms of assault. It's quite the shock to behold. There is a later shock on top of this too, but I won't spoil that. In fact, there's maybe like 7 with this woman. But yeah, the point here is that she is a lesson in the game that you never know how important the person you're talking to is, and that this person has their own life, emotions, and struggles. You as a player may think that joke is funny, but to the other person it may make you a barbaric, heartless fool, and there are repercussions for that. Though I do have to say, this is a very strong lesson to teach me after you just let me mess up and make all of these stupid choices and bad jokes for about 10 hours now. The game even tackles subtle psychological issues such as a detective being subtly biased towards the victim in an investigation. With bias comes agreement, and with agreement comes manipulation. More specifically, they note how, depending on a person's personality, a victimized person of the sex you're attracted to can cause a caring reaction in the other, which for a detective is obviously bad. This is a throwaway moment, completely meaningless, but interesting, and adds a psychological depth to a character and non-existent personality that the player is creating. You start to assume the identity and feel as if it's yourself being critiqued. The closest to this level of personality assimilation I've seen is with Dungeons and Dragons, a game which usually adapts a core part of one's personality, either repressed or desired, or themselves, and amplifies it. Due to this connection, it's often strong, personal, beloved, and so the player is strongly connected with it. The actions and reactions of a world affect you. I've yet to see this possible or happen from a video game, and it's extremely impressive in context, because usually dialogue systems limit expression, intent, possibility, and reaction. But not Disco Elysium.
No, not an idiot. You're just more of a sensitive type. Thinks with his heart. This woman's pain draws you. There's no way of knowing. All bullshit, man. I ain't especially that guy. That guy. No fucking way, man. Really? Quick. Glory. Truth. Softness. I take it back.
A good example of a perfectly designed character is Everard, the union boss. This is the head of all the workers. They look up to him as their hero. He gets them wins and cares about the lower class man, or so they think. He may indeed be better than others. He's not Lex Luthor or Jeff Bezos, but nonetheless he is corrupt and greedy. He is no beast man, which isn't helped by him just lounging around in chairs all day as his loyal lackeys do all the heavy lifting. His personality reflects this. He talks down to you, but also kindly, as if he's trying to help.
Oh, by the way, I heard you got a rather rude reception from a certain Lawrence Gart. This should take care of that nonsense. It should be sufficient to cover your expenses for a few days and patch over your differences with a cafeteria manager.
Wow, that's 25 real. That's good money. You need it.
Okay. I respect a man with principles.
Further, the game shows political perspective on this. With politics being a heavy, subtle backdrop, he keeps people distracted with silly tasks, such as parties and chasing racists to hide his corruption and control. It's a funny perspective I've always had in real life. We're also angry at McDonald's for their stupid paper straws that massively inconvenience our lives, but, we welcome it because they're helping the environment, right? But they get away with with thousands of toxic vans and pollution and destroying the ocean and so on and so on. Capitalism placates the people. It uses them and it keeps them happy, distracted and ignorant with minor problems so they don't notice they're being used or the larger problems. It is all perspective though. Others may indeed just see a man who's using capitalism to help his people as a communist. Now, my first major criticism of the game pops up, and it is a common one for many games: walking. Now, don't take that vague statement as fact, because if so, Death Stranding is a walking example of that criticism. Anyway, the game has a few NPCs that you need to return to multiple times in really annoying places. So here's two examples of this. First, you have a young woman mentioned prior who was involved with the plot twist, and numerous more. You don't need to worry about spoilers, by the way, because she's locked away until you're able to talk to her anyway, so you don't even have the option of twisting the plot earlier. You have to enter the Whirling in Rags, head upstairs for a short loading screen, walk up to her door and activate it, up her stairs for a short loading screen, through another door, another short loading screen, and then talk to her, and then do that all over again to get out. This same thing persists too for the Union boss, whom is a very lengthy walk to the harbour. For some NPCs this isn't too bad, as there is always something to do on the way to them, but these two very important NPCs require far too much effort for how often you have to visit them. I do find out later there is something minor that helps with some of this, but I still stand by that they put two of the most necessary NPCs in the most annoying places. The moments when you sleep or isolate yourself are psychological genius. The game tackles the painful process of self-reflection perfectly. Different parts of the brain talk to you as if the random thoughts of self-loathing or suicidal consideration or depressive isolationism fight with you and between each other. I'm sure everyone viewing this has been there in some way, as I have. You lay there, you have several perspectives that clash and combat with each other to decide in your mind who the winner is. Do you give up and drown in sorrow? Do you fight and try to make a better tomorrow? Regardless, the chaos of the mind is hard to untangle, and it's these moments sleeping you get to try and untangle it. But of course it's just not possible, not yet. It's funny to think that we spend upwards of 20 years developing and forming a brain, and one single painful event can leave you damaged for longer than it took to actually form your brain. This does bring up another minor criticism though. The moments of sleep are supposed to show you how bad Harry's addiction is. He lays in sweat, mind racing, heart beating. His mind is supposed to be distracted and he's supposed to feel like death, but really, what would be a hellish experience has no effect on gameplay, which is strange. You could view this as a positive thing, as it may not be fun to have addiction weighing down on skill choices, but you could also view this as strange, because surely a drug addict would struggle to leap across a gap if they had the shakes. Yet there is no penalty for this, and really the gameplay doesn't factor in the addiction. It's purely a cosmetic label built into the identity of a character you currently are not. This is good socially, as you can either choose to embrace or fight against it as a character choice, and it does, as I've said previously, affect the ending. But I do wish it would have had some impact on the gameplay, other than a thought to take some supplements. Now, as I mentioned before, I would imagine that they did this to keep the gameplay as fun as possible, because many games opt out of having hardcore features like that. For instance, Fallout 4 didn't start with the survival mode. Metro 2033 also got a survival mode later on. But really, in my opinion, the game comes across as overwhelmingly realistic and gritty, and not having a feature such as drug addiction actually affecting you kind of works against that. Then with this, day 2 was over, and was vastly different than day 1. In day 1, everything is chaotic. The city is a mystery. Hundreds of new unknown people. Are they lying? Are they truthful? You spend every second of day 1 creating a map of a cobweb, knowing exactly where each strand is. Then on day 2, you spend time going to each strand and working out if it's loose, strong, fraying, or broken. By the end of day 2, I knew a lot about the murder. I knew who didn't do it, who was bad, who was guilty. I knew a heck of a lot with only a few loose ends to mop up. In fact, by the end of day 2, I went to sleep very early at 10 because nothing was left for me to do. Which is because on day 3, a second section of the game world opens up across a bridge. Finally, things feel like they're falling into place, less chaotic than ever. So let's see what day 3 has in store for us, and if this new section of the cobweb reveals everything. When I wrote the notes on this little statement about day 2, I didn't think anything bad of it, but there's actually 2 really big clues here that indicate a massive problem, probably the biggest criticism of this game. I'll let you see if you can work it out yourself, detectives, because I'll talk about it later anyway. With day 3, the map now opens up and I can explore the coast and progress the investigation. Immediately I head across a bridge and get duped into waiting 2 hours on a bench to search a car. It's said to wait for a lower tide, and I am just glad I waited 2 hours, not 12. Nonetheless, the walk here is beautiful because you transition from this dense globalist city into a wasteland of barren nothingness, almost desolate. The map works in a sort of yin and yang, where one side is the opposite of the other. The only negative thing I'd have to say is that this coastal side of the map is completely underutilized, and you'll be hearing more about this soon. Kim praises me. And it feels better than any praise I've received in real life. This moment demonstrates how well the game does in providing player agency and expression. It isn't like other RPGs where you are a hero who shifts his moral compass. In Disco Elysium, you are a literal blank page. You are nothing. The words said aren't just good or bad, but how good or how bad, and even that, how good or how bad, is a different form of either good or bad depending on how good or bad the person you're speaking, preaching, or commanding is. Okay, sorry, that was a lot. Put simply, it's the most real, gritty, and raw a dialogue system has ever been. The choices and influence over the world and characters means you form a real connection through the main character, connecting yourself to every NPC and the world. So when Kim, someone whom I want to like me, praises me, I'm happy, I'm proud, not because it means I'm doing good, but because it means I have made myself good. What can be more impressive than a game making me happier to conform to a coded NPC's social pressure than that of real life? Right then, day 3, the fishing village, the coast. I went in expecting a new dense area of exploration, more loose ends and wacky characters, and I felt very disappointed. First, I was disappointed because the area is quite large, but barren, and not in a good way. This is starkly opposite of the main city, which is small but exceedingly dense. Every corner, every nook, every cranny is filled with interesting characters, quests, lore, riches, and this second area, well, is quite empty and mostly just walking around with a few bits of lore and some side quests. The barren area does create a new sense of atmosphere. You're in a world forgotten by capitalist greed, communist belonging, or moralist care. The towns are a mess, people barely survive, the place is a wreck, plain and simple. Side quests even tie into this area as you're tasked with getting the villagers to accept a new modern school. It sets up Everard, the union boss, nicely though, as he isn't just taking care of his employees but also fighting off an enemy, helping you and expanding out into the coast. All this is happening whilst the boss of the capitalist corporation is sending mercenaries around to control these moneymakers. It's far too much to get into here though, and I really don't want to spoil the game and plot, so you can just play this game and build your own character and affect the world in your way. But I'm sure you can see there is so much going on: political warfare, social control, moral choices, quest narratives. It's endless and vastly complex. Just unfortunate that at the moment, if I want to progress it, it results in walking around a huge open area with no one left to talk to. And I'm sure for those of you that haven't managed to work out this really big problem, this clue that I mentioned, that you're about to, you're gonna get it very soon. My third day goes by very fast though, and I see myself running out of time pretty quickly. Nearing 9 PM and I have 2 time deadlines at 10 PM I need to make. Time deadlines are very 50-50 in games, and I am personally on the side of liking them, if they aren't too controlling of game pace. In the case of Disco Elysium, I do wish there was less time in the day, and I do wish they controlled the game pace more. I find myself exhausting everything in a day and going to bed early, and even with this looming deadline, I don't feel like it will be any different. I'm glad the game taught me that going to bed early is okay, because my doctor told me I was depressed for doing that, but in real life I was actually just productive, getting the next day started. Specifically on the night of day 3, the whirling in rags became me whirling in lax. too many NPCs seems to make my PS5 chug like the main character the night before we started playing. I do discover a few loose ends that I can mop up only at night, so I just start spamming through book dialogue to speed up time. I put Kim to bed and I head on out. Why I put Kim to bed, you may ask? Well, when you want to do naughty things in this game, you put your dad to bed so he doesn't see, and Kim is my cop daddy. With him in bed, I can be a naughty boy. You wonder what naughty thing I'm doing, huh? Well, earlier I saw a lady I could ask on a date. I know, very fetid of me. So without Kim there, I can freely go on a walk with the lovely lady. Honestly, I only did it to give her my sword. For her to give me her sword. She has a literal sword, see? Doing this, I realise very annoyingly, you can fast travel to and from map sections. I would have loved to have known that before. To further complicate it, you have to be standing in very specific spots. So you have to walk to the specific area to fast travel to having to walk further to even more specific areas. One element I've neglected to talk about until now is the clothing, and I think that's because it doesn't really come into play as a strong part of the game until around day 3, maybe day 2. Firstly, it is not just cosmetic, which definitely does offer something unique, as the clothing is often akin to what an 8-year-old would choose to wear. Okay, I need to see better. I know, the big boots. But anyway, it's also good to be able to manipulate these skills. See, here I equipped composure gear to ask this man why he was so well composed. I had no chance if I hadn't chosen the right clothing, and by doing so, I was apparently coerced into deciding my character's sexuality. I think I'm busy with a murder case. I'll leave that one on the back burner. Now, the game is really good at showing an unbiased, balanced view of all sorts of different beliefs and political stances and personality traits. For instance, we're generally told that fascism is bad and purely explicitly a negative thing, but the game tries to show the good and the bad and the reason that people support it and so on. You can disagree with that, you can agree with that, it doesn't matter, it's all about views and balance. The game is the same with dialogue and people, and just every aspect of the game is just open and realistic, and even though everything is flawed and often negative or ridiculous in the way that people think, it is believable. But for some reason, the developers chose to throw all of this out the window for the subject of honour. Whenever honour is brought up, it's almost spat on, like it's disgusting and antiquated. But more so, if you keep doing honourable things, which, I mean, I'm somebody who likes to think I'm honourable, so I do that anyway in the game, you eventually get the thought for being an honourable person, and you expect this to reflect your personality and to build on your character, but in reality, you get a really strange and almost out of character moment for what you're trying to do, where your character shoves a finger up himself in public. I was so confused by this when it happened. I kind of just assumed that there was something metaphorical going on here, and my character wasn't actually doing that in public, but he was, and I actually did that in public, and everyone reacted quite justly. I would have loved to have made a joke here, but to be quite honest, the whole situation is a joke, why the developers have chosen to throw all of the kind of credibility and work that you put into building a character out the window just to crap on the idea of honour, and why the developers chose no longer to respect both sides of a situation. They just decided no, honour's bad. There is this hilarious turned mournful side quest where you meet a woman outside of a bookshop. You joke around about her needing help. This is an obvious side nod to the arbitrary thing in games where you're always seeking a side quest or some form of experience when it isn't even there. So you convince her that her husband is missing. After all, she has not seen him for a few hours, maybe a day, and she doesn't know where he is. I've had a missing girlfriend for 27 years now, so I relate. However, when exploring, you eventually happen upon the unfortunate death of a drunk man who slipped on an old dock and bashed his head. His cold body lay there for many days, and you eventually uncover his identity, and that he is the husband of the woman from outside the bookshop. It wasn't particularly well hidden, but small quests like this show how the game uses juxtaposing themes throughout quests. Joke turns to mourning. It's well done, it's full of character, and helps the world feel more connected. this random woman is connected to different areas of the map. It also adds a humanistic element to all of it, a rawness of telling a woman in a complicated relationship about her loss. I mean, it's clear her husband was a drunk who would just disappear for a day to 2 days at a time, but it wasn't necessarily bad. There was good, and they were loyal to each other, and he was off to help her return a book to a library, and that's when he unfortunately died. And even though it's a text-based game with no facial animations, somehow you can pick up on this and you feel in the moment the conflicted mourning that's happening. Just to be clear, by the way, I was saying mourning as in grieving the loss of somebody, not mourning as in, oh look, it's daytime. I mean, most of us are conflicted about the morning and waking up, so I would understand, but no, that's not what I meant. This is a beyond minor thing, but I start to really notice it at this point, and it carries on all the way to the end. And basically, I really wanted a new pair of gloves, because you spend the entire game with these ridiculous either rubber gardening gloves or blatant hobo gloves. In an act of pure defiance for this game making me look so positively unkempt, I decide to shave off the facial hair and make the worst mistake of my life, as I see the creepiest grin ever of a face that does not reflect the character I'm trying to make. Jokes aside though, this is good, and it's one of the reasons that the player tries so hard to build this character, because they're trying to overcome something they both are not, and also something that they get told by third parties they are. Anyway, I head forwards with the story and come across the first major flaw with the game, which is the pacing. And you made it, guys. This is everything I've been building up for, with all of these clues and subtle hints. Now is when I realised the major issue here. So, the story unfolds and loose ends get tied up. You're left with very specific tasks that either A, you know the answer, B, you need to wait for a specific time for, such as the bridge to the fishing village, or C, you must wait for some arbitrary thing that can't happen until a certain day. In this case, it was C. It wasn't until day 4 that I could question people about the murderer, in which case I investigated and found an item that linked me to a building I tried to get into many times but could not. Why couldn't I? Not because it was shut, because it was just a ladder to get in, but simply because the game just didn't let me. The developers restricted and railroaded me to the pacing they wanted. Pace control can be fine if done well. If you play and think, I'm not sure what to do right now, or I'm not ready to do this. But sadly, this game has many cases of, I've got to wait for the game to let me do that. This creates many issues, but the main one is waiting. If this wasn't done, I'm sure I could have had the game done long ago, but sadly, no. I've also had plenty of times of time gating. I can think of 3 times just from memory where I knew the answer to something but just had to wait to be told. It's unfortunate that they have to punish those that have done a good job of unravelling the mystery early, of doing well, with making them wait for an invisible barrier placed by the developers to disappear. I could tell at this moment that this is going to be the real killer in future playthroughs for that Platinum Trophy, as they all require random conversation-based topics, one bad ending and some side quest stuff. So I won't be able to control the pace in which these unlock, but just have to go with the pace that the game's artificially forced upon me. This also undoes the great design of allowing skill check redos. Due to the game restricting player controlled pace, you desperately want to succeed a check when you finally do come across one. In this case here, I have been waiting 2 days to explore this building, and now I finally can. I have a 70% chance of success, probably more if I just put the right clothes on. I do not want to fail, and I do not want to have to wait longer. A day, or until I just level up, just to progress something I already know and have been torturously waiting for. So I just do it. I save and be ready to reload, because none of this was an issue on day 1, or maybe 2, where you have countless loose threads and barely enough time to untangle them. However, the issue only grows as the game goes on, and you do not have control of the game, of the case. If we use a railroad comparison, at the start, you get to the station and there's 29 different trains, and you can jump on any of them, question passengers, and go where you want to go. Day 2, that moves down to about 5. Day 3, 2. And then You just get off at the station and there's no trains, and you just have to wait until you wake up one day and a train just appears. Now this that I just said, this applies to every single playthrough. There's no possibility of getting that day 4 train on day 1. You will have to go through the entire day 1, 2, 3 just to get to what you need on day 4. For a one-time playthrough, this isn't that bad, though it does work against the detective theme. But for a game that requires, I think, somewhere between 5 and 8 playthroughs to get the Platinum Trophy, this is bad. This is really, really bad. I would not suggest this to anyone on Earth. Again, I don't want to iterate spoilers whatsoever. I want you to play this game yourself. I want you to tackle the murder your way, or now as we've learned, in what little way you can. I want you to create your own character and put yourself into this world. But something happens that shakes up the whole town, every character. Afterwards, you have a very deep, heartfelt chat with Kim, and as strange as this is to say, his words mean so much it could bring a tear to your eye, maybe. Then you have this feeling of wanting to check on every character and ask them about their opinion. The bad, the good, the annoying or not. These are people, they have feelings, they're real, they live, and you want to understand them, and you want to make sure they're okay. In essence, this game, without a doubt, has formed a strong humanistic connection in my mind to these characters, a strong personality, and one that I genuinely care for. Obviously, I know they aren't real, but real or not, I want them to be okay, and this entire moment demonstrates the perfect writing, conversation options, and more importantly, the way in which the game manipulates the latter to make your mind form an attachment to the characters. Playing the game forces you to connect with them, and once that connection is formed, the brain latches on. People can fall in love with pillows and planes and marry them, so if a bloody love pillow is so easy to believe, you can believe this game will make you feel some attachment, alright? Another example here of the game showing developer bias against Honor by just disrespecting it. Honor is the only case the game does this. It tackles morality, political themes, radical ideas, and handles them by walking a neutral line and showing the good and bad of each other, or even the absurd. But for some reason with Honor, it's just constant negativity. Regarding pacing, the game makes it obviously clear when you're on your way to the end, which is not strictly bad at all, considering it gives you control. But at a certain point you run out of things to do, and when the game's been delaying progress and making you feel like you've been doing everything terribly slowly, you feel pretty pressured to investigate this last area you won't return from. And for some reason my character just stands there like a total Chad, showing Kim his cheeks the whole way there. Shortly after, you can have a little nap. During this nap, you get to understand something about the character's past. It's really hard for me to tell you guys this without spoiling things, but it's really well done and also very symbolic. The character that you're talking to represents somebody that your character would view as a sort of god, as somebody that's amazing and better than anything in the whole world. I'm sure I've pretty much given away to you mostly who this person is and what's going on, but I'll still be vague. While it is done really well, it feels very one-directional. Now, I would have to do this multiple times to really check, but it felt like when I was doing this that you were the subservient person in this conversation and in this relationship. There was no way that you could be like, I don't care. You had to be at their whim, at their mercy. It felt like the game kind of lost its sense of the player choosing the character's personality in this moment in favour of how they wanted the character to be regarding this. It is really good, but for the way I was trying to play the character, it felt like they were taking away something which I was working towards. I found as well later when I did a second playthrough that it wasn't particularly any better, it was just slightly less subservient. Now, after this very calming kind of therapeutic moment of rest, you wake up and Kim is gone. In panic and obviously trying to look for him, I try to zoom out my camera and get even more panicked when that causes what sounds like gunfire, and I think Kim is somewhere being shot, but it's actually just some weird bug with the camera noise. For the last day of the game, and especially now, I start to realise I am just overflowing with skill points that I have no idea what to do with. I could wing it and just put them into skills I think I'll need, like hand-eye coordination for shooting a gun, but Truthfully, I'd rather just wait until the coming event, save, and then see what I need to get and then reload, because when the game tells you you're nearing the end point of the game, the point of no return, what purpose is there holding on to my skills? Like, there isn't, but what point is there just investing them into any random thing you think you might need? There isn't. So, being logical, the best thing to do is to just save scum to work out what to use them on. I think a cool system they could have implemented to fix this would be where if you do a skill check and you have a backup skill point, if you fail that check, that skill point automatically invests into that skill and gives you a second chance, or just increases the chance. Now, sadly, I can't show this piece of footage because it completely spoils the ending of the game, but this last section here, it proves exactly why I save scum. Because I get a 92% chance of success red skill, and I fail it. Which means this is at the very end of the game, and it influences the ending of the game. And so if I wanted to succeed with this again naturally, I'd have to go through the entire game just to get to this one point, and I fail. So yeah, I reload. So regarding this last moment of the game, so, you know, the end. It is, in truth, a both overwhelming and very mundane ending. I won't spoil the details of the plot simply because, as I said, you should play it. But the criminal is not some elaborate serial killer that's tied into the entire plot. He isn't a big political member or someone you even know. He is a nobody. He's a whisper in the wind. He's just something that happened, and you are something that happened, and everything in this game is just something that happened. A series of coincidences that culminate to the ending. Now, I'm not sure from this ending that there are different endings. It seems that the ending surrounds two parts. Part A, the murderer, the case, and subtle influences over that. And B, your personality and progress discovering who Harry is, and I call this the social ending. A is the least influential here, with B being the everything you did in the game changes things part. For my ending, as you'll see here, and I'm happy to show this because it's not spoilers, yours will be different, and so on and so on. I was an openly strange cop with emotional issues who made many mistakes, who drunk himself into a stupor intentionally to forget his painful past, and upon waking up, fresh, worked like a hound, leaving no stone unturned to crack the case and discover a new species of insect. This insect is a very surreal moment linked to a side quest and is the only influence on part A of the ending. Essentially, without spoiling, by doing this side quest it provided a layer of context to part A that you would never see coming. Equal parts fantastical and scientific, yet completely believable. At the time, I wasn't sure how other playthroughs may change this ending, but I felt it would be decently substantial on the social ending, but less so on the case. The case I see being a simple you solve it or you don't situation, with a slight layer above that if you do the insect side quest. On my second playthrough, I did discover that there are additional layers to the ending depending on other side quests that you do. So it does change things and it adds a new angle you wouldn't see, almost like an alternate reality situation depending on how you proceed with your character. You could most likely tell that throughout my experience of this game, it invoked a very emotional response from me. Disco Elysium is more than just a game, it's a reality check. As I did, you will go into this game a blank slate, someone who knows very little to nothing about who they are. You will enter this unforgiving, realistic world completely barren. As you explore, unravel and learn, you will grow. You will develop your understanding of the world and what you think is correct. It is far more than just good or bad, as in other games, but in its own way a personality quiz, complex and complicated, that will instruct you on your political views and social stance. I avidly detest politics. I did a large chunk in university through sociology and I hated every moment. I remember very little and don't care to remember either. After finishing university, if you ask me anything about the political views in this game, communism, fascism, I would not be able to tell you anything. Now, after finishing Disco Elysium, I could tell you about them, the pros, cons, flaws, strengths, opinions, contrasts, and more. It's strange for a game to be so human, so real, so raw, so gritty, but mostly so educational, to educate you on the world, politics, but most importantly, yourself. As such, I learned that I'm a overly self-critical good moralist whom has some communist thoughts, just a few, just a couple. Oh, and that I like to save scum. So, the big question, I don't think I even need to say whether finishing this game is a make me or break me. It clearly made me. It made me see the world and myself differently. Though this channel isn't just about finishing a game, and if every game was just about finishing them, then there would be a lot more make me's and a lot less broken me's. Unfortunately, I must now work towards the Platinum Trophy, fully completing the game as the developers decided it to be. And, unfortunately, this one does not look fun. To get the Platinum, I have to exhaust numerous dialogue options that I had not done before, including Apocalypse Cop, Boring Cop, Honor Cop, apparently I was one short, which is really frustrating, Seeing the Void, and quite a few other obscure trophies. Just to do this, I'm going to have to compile a list of trophies that can only be done on a fresh playthrough and mop up the rest on previous saves. Or at least I thought it would be that easy. I work out that my next step should be to load up my recent save and finish up the moralism side story that I didn't quite finish, and quickly find out I'm locked out for some reason. Sadly, the trophies for quests are incredibly specific and timed and time-gated, so the only way to safely do this is have a day-free save, which I did, and to reload that, pick a political option during my sleep when my brain starts discussing options, and then do the side story from there. I need to do every single political story this way until I have but one left to do on my Bad Cop playthrough. You can see why this is an issue, but hopefully the content is good enough to make it worth doing. Though I feel it definitely will not be, especially as my bond with the character dissipates, as these trophies make the game more of an artificial product of just getting a trophy. All the game's good work being undone by the completion criteria. More unfortunately for me, something gets in the way of me getting the Moralist Fort. I even loaded a day 2 save and raced through the day to try and do that, but never got the fort. Something stopped it, and with so many factors I had no idea what it could be. Thus, if I wanted to get this political fort on a save file where I naturally acted in a moralist way, I have to start from the very beginning again, making sure I carefully and intentionally act 100% moralist and not accidentally click on a wrong option or opt into the wrong fort. As you can see, this system is ridiculously specific, and even when I played to the political theory, it was not enough. So I start again from day 1 and look to do a different ending and a Bad Cop playthrough whilst collecting some rare armor pieces and forget about the political theory quest hunting for now. At this point, I'd spent around 2 hours, maybe 3, just trying to get a side quest to unlock. Reloading save, starting fresh, researching requirements and what I needed to do. So yes, I hit new game, 2.5 hours more prepared. But even then, it isn't that easy. I start a new game with skills I think will be good, and then quickly find out that your logic can't be too high or you're locked out from another trophy. So I have to restart again and ensure I do not have high logic. So I start my next playthrough ready to go and do the Bad Cop and then also mop up some other trophies. And I find out then that I can't get one of the trophies suited up for acquiring all pieces of armour, because if you inspect the body and get the piece of armour that's on the body, then the boy Kuno, who is for another trophy where you recruit him to be a police officer, will make it impossible to obtain all of the pieces of armour and lock you out of that. At this point, I pushed on relentlessly and begrudgingly through this entire Bad Cop playthrough. I pushed on and I kept pressing X to skip dialogue I'd already read and making sure I did every option, going all the way to the end of the game, doing one of the political side stories. And when I finished the second playthrough, whilst the ending was decently different, I just didn't feel anything. I didn't feel enjoyment for the text that I was reading without the emotional connection anymore. I didn't care about the character whatsoever, and I realised there's no gameplay here to keep the player hooked. So once they know about the world and they've read the information and that emotional attachment is done and over, there's nothing. So at this point I just paused the game and I just thought about if this was worth continuing to completion and if these trophies added by the developers even equate to completion. In most cases there is an arbitrary reason for getting all the trophies. It's simply about still enjoying the game and just getting that shiny platinum. or maybe it's a game that you just love a lot, or maybe you just still really enjoy the gameplay, the combat, the mechanics, the shooting. Rarely are there rewards or incentives, and at times you're lucky if the game even offers you something tangible like a costume or unlockable artwork. Now, Disco Elysium does offer Kim wearing a new jacket for completing it, which is really cool because there's a more meaningful reason behind that. But I'm afraid a jacket isn't going to keep me pushing through this. You should have given me a bigger reward like New Game Plus skill points, or an ability to skip time, or just something to make the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th to 10th experience more enjoyable, and allow me to now play the game how I want to, rather than the developers still forcing me through their railroaded experience. In my opinion, this is the worst kind of trophy requirement for an RPG, requiring me to do 5 to 10 playthroughs just for 5 to 10 minutes of text for a side quest. There is no gameplay here to support it. The gameplay and enjoyment is from experiencing the world, characters, and establishing a link between yourselves and those. The developers did an incredible job in cementing a psychological connection to an artificial world, a visceral, emotional response to personality formulation. But these endgame trophies throw it all out the window, discard it all and step on it, because very quickly you do not care about anything. Everything is just a means to an end that's 5 to 20 hours away. Characters' dialogue should be rushed as it's mostly repeated. There's no new clothing, there's no new content. You just end up in a Groundhog Day stuck pressing X and slowly walking from place to place, with all of the minor criticisms throughout the game amplified massively by the redundancy of what this game is making me do. As I said, this could be easily fixed by just removing barriers of player limitation, removing the timer, removing the need to pay for GART, making items you finish the game with ownable at the very start of the next playthrough. Essentially, the game needed a New Game Plus mode where you retain skill points, stats and items. You would just be able to wait around for the times that you need to be doing something. Instead of the game punishing you and restricting you, it would reward you with control for conquering it. Instead, you're just punished with restriction in a redundant experience, unnatural and forced. It's after having these thoughts about the game and analysing this endgame experience on the 2nd playthrough that I decided the completion is just not worth it, and the Platinum Trophy is most definitely not worth it. Now, unlike before, if you asked me again, does this game make me or break me, it leans towards break me. Many hours were wasted going for the Platinum and I didn't even scratch the requirements. It was boring, tiring, cumbersome, mind-numbing, redundant, and the entire time a voice screamed in my head saying why. So all I can say is that unfortunately Disco Elysium broke me. It is exceedingly unfortunate considering the first playthrough was one of the most refreshing and revitalising game experiences I've ever had. I felt more, reacted more, and thought more than I had ever done through a game. Yet the experience after this was the opposite. I felt nothing, reacted to nothing, and didn't have a thought other than, oh god, oh no, what requirement am I neglecting? And let me tell you, there is nothing fun about managing a checklist of requirements like I'm a one-man daddy daycare full of snotty ginger kids with more allergies than totes. Put simply, Disco Elysium is a one-of-a-kind experience that is designed to be a one-of-a-kind experience, and forces on you trophies that make it a convoluted 10 playthrough slog. It moves itself away from a refreshing, unique experience to limbo. If you just play this to finish it without worrying about the Platinum, it's a flawless experience that will make you see yourself and the world differently. If you go for completion, it will break you, or at least just cost you a lot in Netflix subs. due to the completion attempt, I have to say that Disco Elysium did not make me, it broke me. I realise that must have been an absolute roller coaster of emotion for you guys as it was for me. It was really hard writing this and playing the game and going through this complete 180 in emotions and feelings towards it. It was not easy. But thank you everyone for joining me on this journey. It may indeed have been a roller coaster for you as it was for me. Please also understand I love the game, I do, just not the completion. I do not want to have to platinum a game for the sake of it, because I want everyone watching this to be impressed or something. I want you watching this to inform your own choices. Do you want to finish or complete this game? Do you agree? Not acquiring the platinum speaks more words than forcing myself through it for a platinum trophy. And if I do force myself through it, I may end up with an even sourer taste in my mouth. If you made it this far, I'd greatly appreciate a like so that the YouTube algorithm knows other legends like you will enjoy this content, and I greatly look forward to seeing you in the next video. Here's your little clue for this one. If you make it to this next video, you absolute legend, you'll be in a league of your own. A league of...
The world denied my happiness. Now all will die.